years. He is currently the Executive Vice President for Public Affairs Policy and Communications for Verizon Communications. And as you know, he and his thoughts and ideas have been center stage in all of the discussion that's going on with net neutrality. And in this role, Tom oversees a whole host of things: media relations, employee communications, reputation management, philanthropy, corporate responsibility, and importantly, external relations for Verizon. He is responsible for the development of Verizon's public policy positions and advocacy at the local, state, federal, and international level. And Verizon is certainly fortunate. We are very fortunate to have a thought leader of his reputation and contribution with us today. Please join me in welcoming Tom Tauke.
Well, Carly, you are a tough act to follow. That was a great speech. There were a lot of applause lines that in a different group would have resulted in people jumping to their feet, but this, of course, is a very quiet and studious crowd. You know, I admire you greatly. You are trying the government thing after business. I tried the business thing after government. I hope they both work out well. I think it is fair to say that the question we are being asked at this conference, is the United States losing its edge, is a question that reflects the concerns of the times. I think in the midst of economic downturn, we all often tend to reflect a little bit on the difficulties we face, and that's not all bad. It focuses the mind. I think if we address this question, however, from the perspective of the information and communications technology industry, we can be very encouraged by some things that are happening. As Carly indicated, of the 4 significant potential growth industries in this nation, it's the information and technology industry that continues to be number 1. That, I think, is true for 2 fundamental reasons. The first is that capital moves, and yet it's mobile, it goes any place, and the capital in the information and technology industry is generally staying in the US. In 2009, a tough economic year by any standard, this industry invested $430 billion. That's a huge amount of investment, and it reflects great faith of the industry in the future of this nation. Secondly, by any standard, the entrepreneurial and creative forces that in the US continue to amaze even the sophisticated people who populate this audience. Last night at the cocktail party, we were discussing about the amazing things that Intel is doing with its chips. You never thought they could put more on them, and they keep doing so. We were discussing the fact that last week in Manhattan, in the apartment of our CTO, we were delivering 1 gigabits of capacity per second over the fiber optic network that will soon serve most of our customers. I guess the bottom line is that we as a nation have a lot going for us in this space. Yet there is concern, much of it centered around public policy. The bottom line is today for us as we embark in this conference is, will policy promote a healthy climate for investment and creativity in the years ahead? When I accepted this invitation, the National Broadband Plan was just out, and I was gung-ho to talk about a variety of issues that were in part raised by that plan. It lifted our perspective of what could be done. And so I was going to talk about tax policy, how we want companies to locate here and build here and employ here and export overseas. Fortunately, Carly covered that. I was going to talk about privacy protection and how we have to make sure that our customers feel safe online. I was going to talk about spectrum and how will we get the 500 megahertz of spectrum envisioned in the broadband plan out and available for the entrepreneurs to use to deliver new services. And I wanted to talk about network security and the protection of intellectual property. Again, topics that were covered by Carly. But as we gather, the elephant that's still in the room is the issue that has dominated debate in this industry for at least 5 years, and that is net neutrality. On the one hand, this issue is sometimes dismissed as an issue that is a solution in search of a problem. Ed Miller sort of indicated that last night. He still isn't figuring out what problem we're trying to solve. But on the other hand, this is an issue that defines the role of government in the broadband ecosystem. And so therefore, it is really an important issue. There's been great division around this issue, I think a surprising amount. I've been now representing Verizon and its predecessor companies and the policy arena for almost 20 years. We had never had an issue that was partisan before. All of our issues were nonpartisan. But this issue divides us on policy. It reflects differences on philosophy of government. It reflects political differences. And I've come to conclude it also reflects some real cultural divisions in our nation. So it's not surprising that it's controversial. Let's just suffice it to say that this is an issue, when resolved, will play a major role in determining whether or not we have a healthy climate for investment and creativity, whether or not the U.S. is going to maintain its edge. With that as a little bit of background, let me just offer a few observations about an item that's been in the news, the agreement between Verizon and Google on a proposal to address the network neutrality issue. We came together over a year ago now to begin to talk about this issue. We were two antagonists on the playing field, but we thought that there was enough common ground for us to be able to potentially bridge the gap. And we felt it would be helpful to the policy process, the public policy process, if we would be able to bridge the gap. And so we sat down and we focused on two common goals. The first was the belief that an open internet empowers users, and therefore we should strive to maintain an open internet. The second was that we both saw the necessity of continued massive investment in the broadband infrastructure. After a year and some interim statements which gave people a sense of where we were going, we have reached an agreement on a policy recommendation. And I'd like to discuss it briefly with you today. There are 5 key points. The first is transparency. If you believe, as we do, that the internet and broadband and the whole ecosystem should empower consumers, should give them, as Carly suggested, the ability to achieve the American dream, then you know that you want consumers to have all of the information that is relevant available to them so they can make wise choices. We also believe that it's important for creators of content and other entrepreneurs in the space to be able to have all the information they need in order to be able to use the technology that is available in a way that allows them to create. That's what they do. In essence, transparency is key to making the market work. Therefore, in this area, we encourage the FCC to make rules, something we didn't do in other areas, but to actually have rule-making authority to ensure that consumers and entrepreneurs, all users, would know what was going on in this space. Second, we decided to promote open internet access. We adopted, endorsed the FCC principles that we've become familiar with over the last several years. In addition, we agreed to support a non-discrimination principle that is much tougher than any non-discrimination principle that has been put on the table publicly before. It's a non-discrimination principle which essentially says that there is a presumption against prioritization, that there is a presumption that prioritization would likely cause harm to consumers or entrepreneurs. Therefore, we really did embrace the notion of neutrality on the internet. We said we won't favor one party over another. We also tried to ensure that everyone would be offered this basic internet service that complied with these principles, and we did that by ensuring that nobody could offer other services over the broadband pipe unless they were offering an internet access service that complied with the principles. In order to fulfill the objective of ensuring that there was creativity and entrepreneurship in the broadband space, and to fulfill the promise of broadband, we provided a mechanism to offer other services. Certainly nobody believes that the promise of broadband is internet access and video, which is what we have today. As outlined in the National Broadband Plan, there are many other things that we envision that would be part of the future of broadband. Telework, health monitoring, smart grid, smart transportation, the list goes on and on. All of these things are other services that should be available over the broadband pipe, where you need creativity and partnerships to make them work. It's the communications company partnering with the power company to do the smart grid. It's the communications company partnering with the healthcare provider to do heart monitoring at home. That requires a different set of rules than the rules that would govern the best efforts internet. So this provision, however, created quite a fuss. First of all, the New York Times front page says Verizon and Google have A, reached a business agreement. Wrong, this is not a business agreement, it's a policy recommendation. B, they said that we reached a business agreement to prioritize Google traffic over every other traffic over the internet. Again, wrong, just the opposite. No prioritization over the internet was the objective. If you were looking for that correction in the New York Times, keep looking, it never occurred. But in any event, so that, we got that going. And then others, decided to engage in the long perpetuated narrative of a two-tiered internet. That too is wrong, dead wrong. Consumers should have choices of more services. Yes, you want to protect the internet, but you also want to be able to offer consumers more services, and giving consumers more services is a good thing. Giving consumers more choices is a positive thing. For years, we have had businesses that have provided, have used separate networks, we call them virtual private networks or various other kinds of facilities, to be able to offer their employees the ability to track their benefits, to give employees the ability to collaborate with one another at work, to be able to engage with, have employees working in different locations, be able to send information back and forth, to be able to allow you to go to an ATM machine and pull money out of your bank. All of these things have been made available to businesses on networks that also in some cases carried the internet. Did it mean they didn't have access to the internet? No. It gave them a set of other services. Why should we say that this is good for businesses, but it's not good for consumers living at home? Why would we say that a consumer living at home shouldn't be able to have their heart monitored and their blood pressure monitored after they maybe finish a hospital stay? Why is it that we would say that consumers from home should not be able to get secure connections, which would allow them to engage in a variety of activities, many of which we can't even envision yet? The bottom line is we don't offer any of these services today, but this, in addition to the open internet, is a platform for innovation and growth in the years ahead. We also said that because of concerns that somehow these other services might have a negative impact on the internet, that we should first ensure that those services are differentiated from the internet, and secondly, that the General Accounting Office and others, the FCC, should continue to monitor the development of those services, so if a problem arises over time, it can be addressed. The fourth area we touched was wireless. This too caused a bit of controversy. First, we indicated that the transparency, of course, should apply to wireless. But we acknowledged that wireless is different. It is different for a variety of reasons. First, it's the physics. It's mobile. With wireline, we know that there's going to be this connection in this home in this fixed space. With wireless, all of you suddenly gather in a room. In Washington, D.C., they all gather at the mall. There's a traffic jam and everybody gathers. It's a much different situation when it comes to running a network. There also in wireless is no single technology standard. There are a variety of technology standards. Secondly, in wireless, there frankly is more consumer choice. Now, there's a lot of choice in wireline, more than most people acknowledge, but across the country, the vast majority of consumers have 6 or more wireless carriers that serve their area, 4 nationwide. In some cases where we have supposedly hard-to-serve areas, we have up to 20 carriers getting universal service support to serve these hard-to-serve areas. There are just a lot of players in the wireless space. So if a customer doesn't like the policy that a particular carrier is pursuing, they are able to move fairly easily. Third, the marketplace in wireless is changing very rapidly. Just think about it. 2 years ago, you weren't downloading applications on your wireless devices. Now, all of a sudden, we have huge application stores, hundreds of thousands of applications available to customers. And you know what? We couldn't find one instance where a wireless carrier was blocking an application in the network. Not one. But applications are being blocked. You know where they're being blocked? The operating systems developed, by Microsoft and Google and RIM and a variety of others. Those operating systems do block applications. And the operating systems, in some instances, even have the capability where after you download an application, the one who controls the operating system can go in and zap it out. We also noted that a lot of different manufacturers of devices have the ability to control the download of applications. And of course, those who operate application stores make decisions about what goes in and doesn't go in those stores. So when we looked at the, quote, problem of downloading applications or blocking them, it wasn't the network providers that we were talking about in this space that were causing the difficulty. It was these other players. Interestingly, none of the other players wanted to be regulated by the FCC. They thought we should be regulated by the FCC. But in the end, the conclusion was maybe we just don't know enough about this quickly changing space to be able to make a wise policy decision in this area. Finally, it was a little ironic because, there's only one company in the US that has a requirement for open access as a wireless entity. And that, of course, is Verizon. We bid on the C block spectrum in the 700 megahertz auction. That spectrum carried with it a requirement of no blocking and no discrimination. Tougher standard than anything that has ever been imposed on the wireline side of the business. Now, we made the decision to bid for that spectrum, and we made the decision to operate under those rules. The FCC had adopted a policy which said if one nationwide carrier is building out 4G under this set of rules, that's going to ensure that the internet will be open to anybody, and it will ensure that the marketplace will be driven toward openness. And look what's happened since the FCC adopted that policy 24 months ago. Openness has become the standard in the wireless industry. So for those reasons, the conclusion was transparency important, but in this rapidly changing market, putting a lot of other rules in place didn't make sense. Finally, the last area we focused on was the role of the FCC, really the role of government. Verizon has had a long history of supporting the open internet. We were back in the days of Roadrunner calling for openness among ISPs. Let any ISP use any network. And we have supported openness on both the wireline and wireless side. I think have been leaders in this area. But we had always been nervous about having net neutrality rules put in place, in part because of the process. It's what Carly referred to. The policy process, particularly that used by the FCC, simply can't keep pace with the rapidly changing marketplace. And so this was a real area of concern for us, and I think for other players in the space. After the Comcast court decision, there was another issue besides just process, and that is what was the authority of the FCC in this area, the jurisdiction and authority. We addressed both of those issues. First, relating to the authority of the FCC, we concluded this was an issue Congress needed to clarify. We can't go on forever with the uncertainty in this space. Somebody needs to determine which agency has authority to do what, and that is something Congress has to do. Secondly, we concluded, and this is controversial, that the FCC's authority should continue to extend only to network providers, not to operating systems, not to application stores, but our recommendation to Congress is only to network providers. That doesn't mean, however, that the rest are without any coverage or regulation. The FTC currently has the authority to address the issues arising in these other spaces, and that certainly should continue. Of course, if the Congress makes other judgments, that's entirely appropriate. On the process front, we decided that first, it was really important for the industry to step up to the plate and begin to engage in some kind of self-governance. Most mature industries have some mechanism in place. It's a standard-setting body. It's a best practices kind of activity. And some, like the advertising industry, securities industry, have much more robust self-governance processes. So along those lines, we worked with several people here. In fact, the idea started a few years ago in a conversation Joe was and a few others of us had at this setting. We began to push forward in the effort to establish what has become known as the B tag that will work at defining best practices, that will work at bringing the players together from across the internet ecosystem to try to determine what is the best way to handle issues that arise in network management. How should some of the priority questions be set? How do you separate some traffic from others? How do you ensure network security while living with the principles we've talked about? So I think that's an important step. But the second is that we wanted to change the way in which the FCC looks at these issues and the process the FCC uses. The FCC has traditionally regulated the network space through a method that I have called anticipatory rulemaking. You anticipate what a problem is going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. You go through a long process, which usually takes a year or two. Then at the end of that process, you adopt very extensive rules and regulations. That's not well suited for this rapidly changing space. So we pushed for something that has now become widely accepted, the notion of case-by-case enforcement. In the statutes, you have principles. The FCC enforces those on a case-by-case basis. That, I think, is a process that allows things to change as the market and technology changes. Bottom line is this. The Verizon-Google proposal is not obviously a proposal made by policymakers. It's made by, in essence, two volunteers coming together, and by the way, encouraged by policymakers, to see if we could bridge the gap. We believe that the proposal is rational, addresses the issues and concerns of the time, parenthetically fulfills the president's campaign promise of non-discrimination and transparency on the internet, provides guidance in more areas going forward, but certainly is not the answer or the end-all and the be-all. You know, some people in the public policy arena want all of the answers to any potential problem now. That isn't the way the policy process works. It's an iterative process. You do what you can at a given time, and then you go on, and as more information becomes available, as things change, you move the process forward. We hope that as a result of our effort and the result of other efforts that are going on to try to bring players together to see if they can reach some accord and consensus on some of these issues, that we can actually get a policy put in place that addresses this important issue. We want that because it's so important for the certainty that is needed for investment, continued investment in this space. So going back to where I started, we need to get this right. We need to get this right because we want to make sure that we have the investment in the space and we have the creativity and entrepreneurship in this space that will permit the United States to keep its edge in the information and communications technology sector. Thank you very much.